we're going to get started. Janet normally does introductions, so that was me because I'm not as good as she is. But let's all welcome Isaac, our local author, Isaac Blum. Here we are recording, so let me know if you have any concerns about that, because we do post this on our YouTube page after the fact for those who were not able to sign up and come. So this is being recorded. But
do we have a swearing policy on swearing?
Kid-friendly events.
Right. Good point. Okay, right. Young adult novel. Got
is it true that you were a page here at one point?
I was. It was my first job here in the junior room.
Really?
Yeah, I listened to the same 2 CDs on my Sony Walkman and shelved books all day.
Oh, hey, look where you are now.
Look where I am now.
This is like you tell my 14-year-old. It's a lot of application because look what becomes of it.
Right. Yeah, it was great. I know to be. It was a nice. The thing about it is I love books, and I was like, oh, this seems so great. But then just putting them on shelves in order didn't have the same. I didn't feel the same connection to them that I had. The magic was not quite there.
Well, he doesn't have time to read though.
Right. That's what I was saying. Yeah. So.
Tell us a little bit about yourself before you start.
Sure. So my first job was here at the Valentina Library. I then worked at the Cold Stone Creamery in Ardmore, which was a better job. More opportunity to meet other like-minded teenagers. Let's see. I went. I don't know why this is such a broad question. I feel like it's a job interview. Let's see. After college, where I majored in English, because I really love to read, I got an MFA in creative writing at Rutgers Camden across the bridge with some other local Jewish authors like Lauren Grodstein and Lisa Seidman, who are wonderful people, and you should read their books. And then I did a bunch of teaching because a creative writing degree doesn't really qualify you to do anything. And I wrote a lot of books, but one of the prerequisites if you want to have a book is someone who has to want to publish it, really, especially if you want it to be traditionally published by a publisher because you're vain and you want their recognition and them as a gatekeeper to say that you're good. And I am vain and I wanted that. And so I had lots of manuscripts that were rejected by lots and lots of people that I wrote over 10 or 12 years, as I did lots of other things, mostly teaching. So I taught at public school, I taught at an Orthodox Jewish boarding school, I now teach at this soccer school. And throughout that time, I was also writing, and eventually this was my 6th book that I wrote, which kind of came to, unlike a lot of the other things, and I'll talk about this in a second, that took a lot of time to sort of come together in my mind. This was one of the things that there was a lot happening in the world that just sort of compelled me to write this, and I'll talk about that in a second. And so I wrote this book, and that's where that's my background. I'm from Valentina, and I still live here, and I plan to die here. Preferably maybe at yeah, not soon, but maybe at a hospital or some sort of future, there's a hospice that doesn't exist yet. It might be really nice for people. Okay, so and I'll get off the slide that says all these nice things about my book. Has anyone read the book? It's kind of a strange. Okay, so almost everybody. Has anyone not read the book? All right, because I'll be careful because it's a weird book to talk about without spoilers. Because it is hard because there's some major events in the book that I don't want to spoil, but it does make it tricky to talk about. So we'll do our best. Also, given that a bunch of people have read the book, I'll leave more time for just discussion of the book and questions that you might have, rather than a lecture with a slide. This makes me feel like I'm giving a TED talk. Okay, so here's why I wrote the book, right? So we can see this is a bar chart. So it's one of the things I teach my students is math. And so the taller bars means more. And so over the course of a number of years, we had this really massive rise in anti-Semitic attacks across the country and anti-Semitic hate crimes, including violent ones. And it was in some ways it says right here, 2021 was the highest number on record since the ADL began tracking that in 1979, right? I actually had a really interesting argument with my grandparents. We were sort of shouting at each other over the phone about whether this is worse or when they were saying, well, it was worse when Jews just weren't allowed to have jobs. Certain jobs, they'd be like, oh, you're a Jew, you can't have it. And I was like, well, this might be worse because that's someone telling you that over the phone, and this is someone potentially trying to kill you. And so we were sort of discussing which of those particular terrorists is worse. It's not a not a fun discussion, but I thought it was an interesting one. Yeah, so that was really scaring me. And then I kept seeing headlines all like this, and you've seen them as well, I assume, where you just had like really gross, awful incident after gross, awful incident. And I was like inundated with all these headlines. And this was right around like 2018, 2019, and I felt uncomfortable and awful about all of it. And then I was watching sort of these two stories come together at the same time. I was reading articles like this, where this was in the Hudson Valley, and you had a group of Hasidic Jews trying to move into a new community, and then that community was blocking their development in that town. And some of what I thought, some of the concerns of these sort of entrenched locals struck me on paper as like very reasonable concerns of like, well, what happens when this changes our local school board, and what are we going to do our public schools, and it's going to change the way things are funded, and it's just going to create lots of new problems to solve. But when this goes into the news and people already have many often preconceived notions about Jews, it creates a much more terrifying situation than just a dispute over zoning laws, which people have all the time. It creates something that creates a national news story that feeds conspiracy theories, of course, and leads to violence instead of simply a disagreement about zoning. And so then this happened, where there was a shooting in Jersey City at a kosher market, which was very disturbing, obviously. And it was a similar kind of situation where you had a new community, Hasidic community in this case as well, priced out of certain living situations in Brooklyn, moving to a new community. There was some local tension. But again, the people, in fact, who perpetrated the crime were not locals. They were just people who read online about it and fed in and were part of this sort of online world of conspiracy theories. In this case, it was the Black Hebrew Israelite movement that's been brought back into the sort of zeitgeist, is not the right word, back into the conversation right now through Kanye West and Kyrie Irving, who I think the rapper and athlete who subscribed to some of those views, or at least supported them, right? So it wasn't, in fact, the local people who knew the Hasidic community who committed the crime. It was people who read news stories like this from elsewhere, who had been fed all of those conspiracy theories and had all of that hate, who carried out these crimes. So I was seeing all of this at once, and it felt important to write a book about it. And I think this thing in particular sort of tipped me from deciding that the book really had to be about an Orthodox teenage protagonist, because although a lot of these other headlines are at, say, places of worship where a Reformed Jew or a conservative Jew or a Reconstructionist Jew might be just as likely to be a target, people who present, because of their religious identity, present as Jewish on the street are just more naturally likely to be the victims of this sort of attack at a place that is not religious. It's simply a place to go buy groceries. But if you appear that way, you're much more likely to be a victim of that attack. And it felt particularly disturbing and particularly necessary to write a book about it. And we have some of this just continuing now. So here's this tweet from our ex-friend, now enemy, Kanye West. And then the other reason that I felt important for there to be sort of Orthodox character at the center of it was that I was talking about this with my literary agent, who's an Orthodox Jew, and then ultimately with my editor, who's raised Orthodox but no longer identifies that way, is that we were looking around at like the way that Orthodoxy is generally portrayed in the mainstream media, which is as like only in terms of a certain oppression, which is like I think is a valid story and one that perhaps should exist, but shouldn't be the only. If you have a world that most people don't know a lot about, it should not only be seen that way when there are lots of people who derive all sorts of meaning from those rituals and traditions and from that religion, and that shouldn't be the only message that people receive about that community. So that was another important piece of it. Oh, this is me. This is what my couch looks like. My wife really likes it because it has like a mid-century kind of feel to it. And then I can talk. I'll talk very briefly about how the book sort of became a book. And I borrowed some of this from some presentations I do for students, but I still think it's fun to talk about, because I had actually not heard of this idea until I sort of got into publishing, this idea of planners and pantsers. That people talk about. There's two types of writers. There's people who plan very meticulously, like this person, and then there's people who just like have no idea, just fly by the seat of their pants. I'm definitely more on the pants side, but I definitely think it's more of a spectrum. And usually I feel like I'm flying more by the seat of my pants. But with this book, especially because I based it on I had some real life events around which to center the plot. It made it feel a little bit less like I was flying by the seat of my pants, like the world had written an outline for me that I could follow just at least a little bit. The main method I use, people will ask me a couple times I've had a chance to ask questions, what is your writing style? And I describe it as, so word vomit. So what happens is you feel ill, usually by your inability to think of anything, and then you just throw up all the words on the page, okay? And then once you've done that, you can then once you have all the vomit, you can rearrange them. So I tend to at least convince myself that I can just stick a bunch of words out there and I'll come back and make them make sense after the fact. For this book, I did actually make an outline of what I wanted to happen in two ways. How I wanted the characters' arcs to progress, like how I wanted them to change as people, and then how I wanted the actual events, the plot points of the book to go out. But then I also wrote down jokes that I wrote that I thought were funny, so I didn't forget them. So like here, Tiffany tells Hoodie to plead the fifth, eat string cheese, say nothing, let me speak for you, looking trite and obsequious. And Hoodie says, I'm going to need a dictionary to pull that off. The joke being that he doesn't know those two words. And jokes are always funny when you explain them. So he doesn't know the words, so that's why it's a funny joke. And I was like, oh, Isaac, you're clever. That's funny. You should write that down so we don't forget it and you can put it in the book. And so I did. And so it's in there. And then I sent it to like critique partners, people who, if you're thinking about writing a book, I highly recommend that you get other people to read it because mostly people are very bad at judging their own work, at least in my experience. I write something, I have no idea it's good until, or what about it is good, or what about it is not good until, and so I have these are semi-fictional people. One of them's name is Mike, but he does not look like that. He's in his 30s, and he's of average height. And he mostly tells me like things that could be better about the book itself, like I don't really understand what this character's thinking here, and it's not making sense to me. Or I don't really think this scene is doing much for the story, and it's distracting from the narrative. Let's get rid of it. And then I have a friend named Lauren, who I think really more or less does look like that. And she just tells me to cut the jokes that aren't funny, which is why the reader gets a narrative that isn't only a series of terrible jokes. They get like the few jokes that are probably funny enough to stay, and the rest of them go away. Okay, and then I was like, people want to publish this book, and they're like, no. And then eventually someone was like, yeah, bro, we'll take it. That was the people at Penguin. And then I think this is worth our time? Yeah, sure. This was just I thought some interesting editorial stuff, sort of the idea of, if you're from the top of the students, I'll talk about the idea of showing versus telling, right? So if someone's looking sad, someone is sad, instead of just saying like, Bobby is sad, if you say like, Bobby took the coffee mug and hurled it against the wall, that shows his anger in a way that might be more interesting. And that was apparently something I struggled with according to my editor, so I fixed that. And then it didn't occur to me that we should know what the main character is thinking throughout the story. And that was another thing that my editor really wanted to know. Like, we've got this guy, and we're in his head for like 200 pages. Surely we should have some idea of like, what he actually thinks about what's happening. So those were kind of the main editing things that I was looking at. And I was actually talking earlier about the difference in the cover, and you were saying that the census don't really look authentic here because they kind of look more like thick leather straps than they do like actual census. And I think that's fair critique. But I was given this initial sketch, and I only get so much feedback. So by the time his hand wasn't invisible, and we had census on both sides, and she wasn't wearing an overcoat in the summer and all that kind of stuff, like I kind of had to deal, be okay with the small things that are left, because the person who does the art for these things, interestingly, is not usually someone who works for the publishing company. They usually save money by just outsourcing that work to someone that this is my cynical way of interpreting it, presumably so they can pay them less and not give them sort of like benefits and stuff. That's my sort of cynical anti-capitalist way of looking at it. So the person who does this is a very talented Czech woman who does really good art, but there's a limit to the number of like rounds of feedback that I'm allowed to give, and then the Penguin will still pay her to do more work for it. So there you go. That's the whole thing, and then we get back to this is the couch again, which I've been told is in mid-century style. And this is a coffee table. It's mosaic my grandmother made it. Yeah. It's lovely. Okay, we'll go back to a screen that like is blank maybe, so it's not a distraction. And then if anybody has any questions about the book or publishing or really anything, if you want to talk about like what percentage we think we can get out of Jalen Hurts on 2 weeks from now, like Happy Shoulders, I'm happy to talk about that. Any questions?
Are your critique people also writers? Is that like a
Yeah.
writing group you have?
Yeah, so my aunt also helps. She's here. She also helps me. I didn't include, I actually have like 4 people, but I didn't, for the sake of a presentation, it's much easier to be like, hey, there's 2. Yeah, so other than my aunt, who's a wonderful editor and worked at this library for a long time, is a wonderful person, and I would say all those things even if she weren't in the room. I have 2 good friends that I met through my MFA program who are also writers, and I can trust them to give me like extraordinarily honest feedback. Like if they really think something's a complete mess, they'll tell me, and that's really, really nice. And I also I think over time, if someone's read a lot of your stuff, they get a sense of what you're trying to do. So it's not just like they can tell me why this does or does not work as fiction. They can also tell me whether I'm accomplishing what they know I'm trying to do, and that's very helpful as well. So I've been sort of sending manuscripts back and forth with those two people for like 10 or 12 years now. One of them, Mike, has a debut book coming out in 2024 called Early Sobrieties. It's not a young adult novel, but I'm
Did you critique his?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So it's.
Yeah, and if he'd listened to me, it would have been published like 6 or 7 years ago. It was rejected by every editor in 2018. And once he made the suggestions that me and the other guy said he should make, boom, published. Yeah.
Geographically, I know this is a fictional city or town. Where in your head was this taking place?
I was trying to make it take place in a kind of like, I was looking around and saying like, hey, this anti-Semitism exists everywhere in this country. So I wanted it to be very much like this could be anywhere kind of place. So I didn't think too much about a specific spot. There are 2 towns in the book. One is named Tregarin. There's a street called Tregarin less than a mile away from here. So that's that. There's another one called Colwyn that's in the book. So that's also a street in Ballackinwood. So I took the names from streets in Ballackinwood, but I didn't really imagine it happening in like the Eastern Main Line. And I think that the only reference in the book, actually, I'm not sure. The only reference in the book to there being a sense of place is a discussion of the Philadelphia Eagles. So there's not a lot of, and that was intentional on my part. I wanted it to feel like it could be anywhere. Whether that's right or wrong, I sort of went back and forth with the publisher on that a little bit. They wanted it to feel like it was more grounded in a specific spot, and I felt like I wanted it to be a kind of every place, especially because if it's in a specific place, then people who live there might say that's not actually what's happening. But it is happening in a lot of different places. And I also feel like as soon as you make it in a specific community, then you also gives you an extra responsibility to get like the exact type of people who live there right. And I also didn't want to be speaking for any particular community. So just as like this, I hope it can be a kind of every place. Like I think that the communities that are set in the book are also not a specific, like Hoodie's not Hasidic. I didn't say like this is what Belzer Hasids are like. There's nothing like that in the book. He's sort of fits into a space kind of between modern Orthodoxy and Haredi Orthodoxy. It's just kind of in a kind of interspace that I didn't want to be speaking for any particular world or community because I didn't feel like that was something of a responsibility I should take on. Yeah.
But the community has to be close enough to New York City because they got priced out. They were trying to create a new.
They got priced out in the book,
Yeah.
but it doesn't say that they got priced out of a New York town. It doesn't say that. They can get priced out. Lots of towns get expensive. And in fact, one of the things is if you go around, there's certain parts of Brooklyn where if you go around, you'll see signs advertising Ballackinwood as a place to move for New York Jews for who want something that's more reasonably priced. We have a lot. There's lots to offer.
So what is your background with Judaism?
My background with Judaism is that I would say I was raised more of a secular Jew. My father is, I would describe, and my mom can correct me, sort of a militant atheist, and really, really against sort of religious anything. And my mother, I think, would have raised us differently if it were just on her side. She takes a certain amount of pride in having, she claims, had to have been the first person to belong to Adam of Israel, probably without her husband also belonging, or at least the first married woman to do so. So there was definitely like a sort of clash in that space. As for what, so that, that's sort of the world that I grew up in. And sort of my understanding of the world I pictured in the book came a lot more from my adult life and sort of, and as a teacher than from my childhood.
But you said you taught it at an Orthodox.
Yeah, I taught at an Orthodox boarding school for a couple of years, which informed. I don't like to think that like I took my students' lives and wrote about them. I don't think that's true, but I certainly spending a couple of years sort of with Orthodox teenagers more or less all the time. Certainly, I think allowed sort of hoodie character to exist in a way that it couldn't without.
I was checking if this particular person is here. She's not here. So we had an argument about the book. She said, well, it shows me, she said, what this couldn't happen because you had it set. The book starts off with Tu B'Av, and they said Yeshiva is closed at that time. I said, well, you had a reason for starting in the summer, and this is literary license.
Yeah, I mean, I think, all right, so I don't think that, I think there are any number of, I think this is just like there's such a huge range of practice and within any number of different like yeshivas, Jewish schools. And also there is a certain necessary, like in the book, he's in school in the summer because I wanted to start on Tu B'Av because especially, it's not really a big holiday here that I'm aware of. It's mostly in Israel. It's sort of a kind of Valentine's Day. And like the sort of meet cute, such as it is, where the sort of thing that drives the plot is him seeing this girl out the window on Tu B'Av wearing white, which sort of jives with the tradition of Jewish girls wearing robes, dancing in plain white robes in Old Jerusalem. And so it felt like a sort of natural way to start the story. I don't know any like local yeshiva that would also be open in like say early August, like they do take summer vacation, but they're definitely certainly it depends. Depends on the school. All these things depend. It's a fictional
I said
world.
he looked out the window. Why would they bother with the window? They could just have a wall of bookshelves.
I think to a certain extent, like
public street.
as is true with more or less any, especially young adult. If you want to have a plot, sometimes it's going to take something that is out of the ordinary or is unlikely to happen in order to get the plot started. Like I think from a basic realism standpoint, there's a low chance that a serious yeshiva student is going to walk out on the street and just strike up this random relationship with a completely secular girl who looks nothing like. I just don't think that that's a likely thing to occur. But those sorts of things happen in young adult novels all the time, and it's a chance to highlight a lot of sort of community building, community healing sorts of themes, along with these themes of anti-Semitism that play out. And I just don't think I think you have to sort of balance like where should realism stop and where are you willing to take a certain amount of license in order to have a plot that will exist. And I don't think that you should be willing to shatter like all norms of the world in the way that anything would happen, because then you're writing science fiction at that point. But I do think there are certain artistic licenses worth taking to so that a story can happen. That makes sense.
What do you make the book young adult instead of like adult book?
I think just because, so the question, yes, why a young adult book, not an adult book? I'm just not as interested in adult life. Like, I ask how old you are? All right, so you may find that as an adult, life is like extraordinarily boring. Not particularly interesting. And like, there's a certain natural tension and stakes and importance in like coming of age. Like the time from, I don't know, age like 12 to 17, or any given point in there, where you have to, it's like the only time in your life you're going to have to sort of decide who you are. I mean, you might get to do it again, but like everyone in that age is going to be forced to decide who you are, who you want to be, what you're going to do if that's really different from the way that the world around you wants you to be. Like all of those sorts of questions someone in that age is going to have to answer. And so there's like this just natural, fraught, interesting coming of age thing that I found interesting when I was like 15-ish, which is how old he is. And I just think is like interesting, natural thing to explore in a book. Whereas if you have an adult story, you have to like create some sort of very boring problem for that adult to have. Whereas I feel like if you're writing a teen book, those problems are just like already there by virtue of them being a teenager and having to figure out all of those things. And so I think that's like the first part answer to the question. And the second part answer is simply that like, I don't know that I had aged past 15 in my mind. And so like a significant portion of the writing process, in my writing process, is just coming up with silly jokes that I think are just much more like 15-year-old jokes than they are 34-year-old jokes. So that's the reason to write something about this.
You sound like a very knowledgeable Jewish person in this book. So to what degree did you have to do some research? Or was it all from your grandmother and your teaching experience? Or did you have to do some research? To get some of the...
You know, I think from teaching, there was a lot of it, like a lot of the sort of discussions of like Talmud and halacha that you see in the book are just ones that I was having personally with, you know, in that, you know, when I was teaching. And then also there were other parts. I mean, I felt like I had a good handle on these things. Also, I've read everything Chaim Kotak has ever written, and then one of the things that I was concerned, like, I want the book to be, you know, I don't want to misrepresent anything. Definitely not was something I was, you know, not worried about. It's something I wanted to be was really cognizant of. So, like my agent, for example, so a literary agent like represents a book and then tries to sell it to a publisher. So she was raised, she would sort of have self-identified and still does as like a yeshivish Jew. So more Orthodox than a modern Orthodox Jew, but not from a particular, like not Hasidic, meaning not descended from a particular Hasidic dynasty, more of like a Lithuanian like yeshivish background. And so she was also with me sort of through every step of editing the book for sort of all the pieces of little details to make sure that I had not put a foot astray in that. And then also my editor, so who eventually acquired the book, was also raised Orthodox, although unlike my agent, no longer identifies that way. But I sort of had those people sort of with me through the process, and that was also really helpful. So I think, you know, the things that they changed are like very small details, but I think they're really important to us.
Was Jewishness an issue for the publishers?
It's an interesting question. Was Jewishness an interest? Like, was it too Jewish?
Were they concerned?
They were, I wouldn't say concerned. There was a good, I mean, amazingly, there was like a good amount of interest in the book. Like there were a couple of editors, they were all Jews, but they who wanted to buy the book. There were concerns about there being too much like Hebrew and Yiddish, mostly Hebrew, a little bit of Aramaic, without enough context. So they wanted either some of that vernacular changed into English, or they wanted, and they wanted the ones that weren't changed into English so that there was still, it was authentic or ish, or it felt true to people who were, you know, supposed to be reflected in the book, you know, things that were contextualized. So like originally the idea of sneas or snew, sort of dressing modestly, was in the book, but had no explanation. It was just like, oh, Anna Marie, you know, is walking around with, you know, no sneeze going on. It's ridiculous. But there was no explanation for what that meant. And so there needed to be sort of what I was hoping were like sort of subtle explanations afterwards so I think now it reads something like, in my community, we had this thing called sneas, you know, the standards of modesty and modest dress, and she was violating them in like 8 different ways. So there it's changed so that it's the same meaning, but you have a little bit more context. So that was the stuff that they wanted. They were not, I don't think, concerned that the book would be like too Jewish for a mainstream audience, just that we needed to make it a little bit more accessible. And then subsequently, I've also heard from people who are, you know, say Orthodox Jewish readers who feel like, I've been told, sort of taken out of the world by the fact that, for example, Lee says it's going to pray instead of daven. And they're like, well, no, Orthodox Jewish 15-year-old ever going to say, I'm going to go pray. They're going to say, I'm going to go daven. And I'm like, yeah, that's true. There's a compromise like that. So there's somewhere on there we want to find the right balance of authenticity versus accessibility. And there's probably not going to be a perfect space that's going to meet every reader.
So my follow-up is, how is it being received in a community that's not as Jewish? Like, are there schools or libraries that don't, we have a Jewish population and we live amongst it, but out there, how is it being received?
I would say in some ways it's being received by a completely non-Jewish world, in some ways better than by a Jewish world, you know, in the way of like, you know, sort of 2 Jews, 3 opinions kind of thing. Like there are definitely some people who feel as though, I would say in general, it's been a well-received book, like it's been well-reviewed. I've heard mostly good things. I would say that from like a secular standpoint, like the completely non-Jewish standpoint, like it was longlisted for the National Book Award, which is amazing, and it's a completely non-Jewish organization. There's a finalist for something called an ALA, an American Library Association award called the Morris Award, which is it's given to debut young adult novels. So it's one of 5 finalists for that. And I think in many ways it's been well received within Jewish communities, but there's also people who feel like, you know, the Jewish representation is, I think it's very positive, but there are some who think it should be more positive. That in a world full of anti-Semitism, the only way we should show Jews is only as great. And that in my mind, I think that like the humanity in everyone is that there are flaws in every community. That's something that I want to show in the book, but I do understand why, you know, you're more likely to have to take issue with something that is sort of out your world than something you don't know. I just think that's natural. So that's what's interesting is that I think I've heard lots and lots of positive things from Jewish readers, but I think there's a more sort of mixed response there and a more, I'd say, even more exclusively positive response from non-Jewish readers. Yeah.
I just love the way that you dealt with his family and how you portrayed them. That was like one of my favorite parts of those sisters, and I think it, you know, that shows a humanity, because every time people think of Orthodox, you don't think of people being, you know, the way he was with his sisters and love and
You don't
everything.
think?
Yeah.
I think that's exactly what I think about when I think of Orthodox. I think of like that.
Well,
sort of-
when I watch the movies, and,
Okay, sure, the movies,
I'm
yeah.
saying what's portrayed. I'm not saying
Sure,
no.
understood.
I don't.
Understood.
Yeah.
What was your inspiration for his sister on the roof?
Oh.
She was a character.
I think there's just like, if you have a bunch of siblings, I mean, I didn't grow up in a family with a lot of siblings. I've seen enough of them that it just feels like there's always just a troublemaker kid.
Yeah.
And I do think that like just a significant, I cannot stress, like I think I've written what is like a good novel, but the thing I mostly judge myself by when I finish it is not like, is this a good book or does it make sense or anything like that. It's like, how many laughs do I think I might elicit from the average reader? And so a lot of it is not like, oh, this would be a great character. It's like, hey, it might be funny if there's someone who throws stuff at people. So that's, you know, that's a significant part of it. It's just that sort of.
Well, it's gender reversal. Yeah, he has wild sisters, and usually it's boys that are portrayed that way.
Yeah, I think I wanted him to be. I can't even. What did I make him? I think it just was like it was just easier to make him the only boy, because then you've got it kind of highlights like these sort of male expectations that are centered on him that would be more complex and for me and just trickier to deal with if he had brothers.
I loved your characterizations. I liked your character development was fabulous all the way through, but he was a real person, and you could really see it.
Thank you.
I loved his sarcasm.
Yeah.
And his
He's very
analysis of things.
yes. He shares my inability to take most things seriously. And it's interesting because, you know, I'm writing another book that will come out in spring of 2024. And my editor was like, well, how are you going to make sure this character doesn't sound exactly like Hoodie? I don't, I've got no idea. I'll try. But like, this is just sort of, it's not a problem I had to, you know, in the previous books that no one published, I could just keep reusing the same character, same voice, the same sarcasm over and over again, because those characters didn't exist. They never made it out into the world. So there was no way for someone to say like, hey, don't you notice that like all these people talk the same? But now for the first time, I will have to try to write a character who is doesn't speak, his inner monologue is not exactly that one, and it will be interesting to see if I can, I'm interested to see if I can manage it. Yeah.
So if you had 6 books that didn't go.
Yeah.
What turned you around? What did you find? What was the spark that made this book go?
It's writing group.
No, I don't think, I think it's just either, so I think, and this is something I tell, you know, like when people say, like people who want to write and like, what's the key, what's the secret? That's like luck mostly. I think, to be honest, I think I happened to write a book that was just like at the right moment, you know, like the other books just.
What are the other books? Young adult.
Yeah,
Was similar to?
Yeah, it's a bunch of young
Were
Jews.
they?
Yeah.
Did they have any Jewish faith in them?
They have all kinds of Jewish, yeah, of course, there's a bunch of young Jews. But I think it's like, I really do think a lot of it is just timing and luck. I happened to sit down and write this book at the time of like this big rise in anti-Semitic violence. And there was also a bunch of, and so it came out, it got into the eyes of agents and editors at a time where it felt timely. And I think there are lots and lots of good books. Like if you think about the number of like quality manuscripts that go to agents and editors and the number of really good books that they have to turn down, lots of them are perfectly fine quality. I think I wrote perfectly mediocre books before that were probably good enough, but didn't fit at the time into whatever the market, which is no one fully understands, was looking for. And I think a ton of it it's just luck. And like you just hope if you keep writing, eventually you'll find one that happens to me the match of the right time in the right place. And I don't think I think a lot of people that never happens. And I think for some people it does really quickly, and for others somewhere in between.
So maybe the other novels will be now the other.
How? Because I do think I got a little bit better over time. And I also think it would highlight just how derivative this was. You know, it would just be like, it would be like publishing. Well, I guess they do this with like artists where they like publish all the sketches that lead up to the painting. But like, I do think like reading crappier versions of this book would not really be the best version.
If no one else wants, I would
Like,
ask
one
about
more question.
characters.
Yeah,
I was just curious to hear a little bit more about your writing process.
Sure.
You said this book felt differently for you to write than your earlier books, that you had like technical events that you had in your mind.
Yeah.
Were you just working on this manuscript and not any others? Did you dedicate yourself just to?
I could only write the one time.
You can do one
I
at a
couldn't
time.
write one book at more than one book at a time, I don't think.
And how long did this one take compared to the other one?
To draft this took me about 3 months, and then probably another like 7 to 9 months to solicit feedback and redraft it.
Mhm.
This is a pretty short book. It's like 55,000 words, which is relatively short. It's like 200 something pages, pretty so it didn't take me that long to get onto the page initially, and then it just took a little bit more time. And a lot of that extra time is not the amount of time it takes me to revise. It's time for me to get feedback, get clarification on that feedback, like relying on other people to come back and forth on that. And I don't, and I think this is something I struggled with in the next book, is that because I didn't have these like tentpole real events to base it on, it was much harder for me to figure out what's gonna happen, because so many of my favorite books are books in which very, very little happens. And I just get to sort of spend time with a couple characters I find interesting. But I think in the world of young adult fiction in particular, there's an expectation of high stakes and a lot of plot points. And I think that's a fair expectation. Like, I think that's what most young readers want. But it definitely doesn't come naturally to me. So I do have to that's something I have to really focus on. Like, have you read The Chosen? My friend Hoodie.
Oh, yeah.
Like, what happens in that book? I would argue almost nothing. Like, it's really just a bunch of like very nuanced discussion about like the intricacies of different types of Orthodox Judaism and Zion, and also like different opinions on Zionism. But I think it's delightful, and I've read it like 10 times. But so I just think that's sort of I'd love to be able to write a book that's compelling, but in which nothing happens. But I don't have enough confidence in myself to like keep a reader interested for that many pages without some stuff going down. Yeah.
I have questions about 3 characters.
Yeah. Proceed.
One, you heard me already. Why didn't you fill up his mother?
Okay. Yeah.
2, why was the mayor accepted? Because she was not from the same background as everyone else in the community.
Sure. Good point.
And the third was, it's actually not a question. I I like the way you handled the esteemed rabbi sage and how he didn't come in and like be the savior or tell him this is how you live your life.
Sure, Rabbi Tao, good dude. So mom originally was basically like not in the story at all. And my editor was like, she can't just like not exist. And I've had people ask, like, why is the mom not a bigger character? And the basic answer is like, in a short, there's like two pieces. In a short book, I just don't think there can be that many characters. And then the other thing is that like, and I can't remember who told me this originally, but like if you read noted anti-Semite Roald Dahl's books, he kills off the parents in like the first couple pages because the way for a kid to have an adventure of some kind and to go through something is to get the parents out of the way. Because if everyone's parents are entirely supportive and wonderful, they're going to take care of the problems for the kid because that's what wonderful parents would do. And then the kid doesn't get to have any sort of adventure. So as long as I was setting up the dad as an antagonist, I didn't want to set up the mom in the same way. So I just kind of pushed her off to the side. Whether that was the right choice or not, I'm not sure. It just felt like a convenient. I didn't want both of his parents to be against him. And I sort of already had sort of Sippy stepping in as like a sort of motherly figure helping him along. And it just felt like I just kind of put her off lesson planning in her room and hope no one questioned me about it. But to your point, killing her off before the book started would have been a really great idea because it would have pre-answered those questions. The other question was about the mayor. Yeah, I don't know. I didn't think too much about that. I don't have. Why is she accepted? You're right. Just because she's not. You're right. She's not from the entrenched community. Her husband is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you never hear about him.
Well, he's dead.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, just saying. Killed him. Yeah.
But why was she accepted? So.
I don't know, she's not a Jew, I guess. I don't know. I don't have a good answer to that. She's been there longer.
Latina.
I mean, honestly, the reason. So I had another question. This is actually a great question of like, why does Anna Marie have such a long name? And this is again like, I wish I had a good answer to this. And it was just because I've never had a nickname and I've always wanted one. And I thought like, oh, this is cool. I'll give her 2 hyphenated names and then her friends can call her hyphens. So that's the only reason that the mom has this different background, and that's the only reason her name is Anna Marie was because I thought that was a cool nickname to get her. So like I'd love to say like, oh, I thought really hard about that. I didn't. Yeah.
So
And Rabbi Tao. Yeah, Rabbi Tao's cool. I do like in the book where it does feel like most of the adults are fairly sort of biased people whose hearts are not really in the right place and I think interpret things really poorly. And I like that most kids in the book, I think, come off as nice people and provide nice sort of hope that we've got a sort of youth who work to understand each other and I think interpret their upbringings in ways that are really positive and all that kind of stuff. But I didn't want it to be like all adults evil, kids great. So I brought in the sort of Rabbi Tao character to come in and sort of say like, no, Rabbi Moritz, no, Hoodie's dad, like you've got this wrong. One question.
So I would say that I think in real life, I've met a rabbi, I've met some other people too. So I thought his Ferdinand's depiction of the Orthodox community is nice to them. And the parents are disagreeing. I think the mom struck me as appropriately distant. In certain families, the mom is like working all the time, supporting, doing a lot of supporting.
In certain families,
where the father has been tolerant.
Sure.
So she is very tired.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
the big sister is taking care of the kids.
sure. I think that's true in lots of families. Just one parent is working all the time. In any family, any walk of life, and lots of big families. There's always if you have any children over a certain number, there's always going to be siblings who help out.
My cousin in Israel is not your mom.
Right, she's not the mom from the story.
She works
as well.
full time and her husband studies.
I was just going to ask to discuss the ending without discussing the ending for anybody, but was it your only ending?
It was definitely, the ending of the book was definitely something that I had started. I knew how it was going to end before I started writing it. didn't really consider. I considered other endings in terms of like how certain relationships would work out, but like the larger events of the last like 30 pages or so, I had set before I started writing the rest.
So you worked kind of backwards?
Definitely didn't write backwards. I've heard that there are people who like, there are other people who are like, oh, I just write all the scenes I'm most interested in, and then I match them together later. And I definitely can't do that. I have to write it from like the first scene to the last. So I did write in order, but I didn't know that I was
But
working
you knew
toward
how you
that,
wanted it
which
to
was
end.
very, very helpful in terms of structuring it and helped me get out a little bit of that sort of like flying by the seat of my pants thing. Because I knew there was something I was working up toward, and a sort of a place that I like. I knew where I wanted Hoodie to end as a character, and I knew what I wanted those ending events to be, and then I just had to kind of get both the plot and the character arc to those places. If that makes sense.
So the next book, it's not a sequel to this book.
It's not a sequel. It's a different book.
It doesn't have the same characters.
It does not have the same characters. It's a different book with different characters. This one, the best way I have to describe it, I think, is that like this book is very much a book about Jews encountering non-Jews. And that book is more a book about like different types of Jews encountering each other. Being like, are you still Jews? Are you Jews? What kind of Jews are you? Those sorts of things. Like, are you a Jew if your mother wasn't a Jew? I don't think you are, but you think you know, those sorts of questions that are a little bit more insular, which maybe I get to do now because this book's out. Like, I think those books are easier as a second book because it's much more sort of insularly Jewish. But I will say that there are a bunch of like very, very Jewish books that are really just pretty Jewish that have done like well recently. So like actually my agent Rena Rossner had 2 other books come out with different authors this year. When the Angels Left the Old Country by Sasha Lamb. There are 2 copies in the Lower Merion Library System. Is a book about an angel and a devil who argue over Talmud for 1,000 years. And then all of a sudden, a girl from their shtetl town moves to America and they decide to follow her. And so that is, I can't really think of a more Jewish plot. But like, it's, you know, it's a mainstream book. You can buy it Barnes & Noble, and like, it's been very well received by lots and lots of people. Right, Blackbird Blue Road by Sophia Pasternak is another good example. The Ghost of Rose Hill by R.M. Romero is a novel in verse about something with a Polish Jewish cemetery, but again, all Jews, there's not a Gentile anywhere to be found in any of those books, and they've still like been published by major publishers.
I almost didn't pick up this book because I had read The Orchard earlier about a kid who goes from an Orthodox Hasidic community in New York to a very posh but religious community in Florida.
Okay.
And it's a hard and heavy book to read, really, really hard. Not kid book, no,
Sure.
not a kid-friendly book. And I think the more humor you can put in, the more people are going to read it.
I hope so. That's all I got.
But as a
Once you're-
suggestion, that's not all you've got. You've got the whole world of soccer and sports.
Oh, that's true. Okay.
And
I can make
if you
jokes
want
about
young
that.
adult people to read your books, write one based on your
You think though?
experience.
Because I don't think teenage boys read though.
They don't.
And like a book about like a bunch of boys playing soccer is like a very male. I don't know. They're not gonna. You
They
should
have to
see
read something.
the themes, the hissy fits my students throw when I'm asked them to read things.
How about a girl playing soccer?
Girl playing soccer would be great. Girls playing soccer. But it's not this, you know, I don't think they play them realistically. We can bend reality, certainly for a book, but like realistically, there aren't yet the same sort of like cutthroat soccer, girls soccer academies that there are men's, because there is not yet enough money in the women's game. But hopefully there will. The United States is one of the more aggressive countries in sports, unfortunately.
Anybody else have questions? Great. Well, Isaac, thank you so much. Thank you for taking us through the process as well.
And anyone wants to buy the book, if you haven't read it, or if you read it once they're over
They're 40s.
What?
No, I was talking about boys, having had 2 boys who never liked to read much. Now they're in their 40s and they love to read.
Yes, but are they gonna read a book about a 15-year-old who has the dream to play soccer?
Well, probably not.
Probably not.
Probably not.
No.
Probably
Probably read like a business book.
I told both my sons about Hoodie. Well, my two oldest kids, for matters of finance, went to a Chabad Hebrew school from the age of, well, my daughter went from 6 to 12 and a half. And when it was time for her bat mitzvah, they didn't believe in girls having a bat mitzvah. It was a group bat mitzvah. So I thought she worked really hard for 6 years. So I had her tutored at a conservative synagogue, and she had her bat mitzvah by herself at a conservative. But my middle son, we moved here when he was 10. So he went to mainline reform and was bar mitzvah there. But they do remember their days in the Chabad, Hebrew school. And one of the requirements was sleeping at their teacher's house on Shabbat. And my daughter said, "You didn't tell me how many kids they had and how the toilet paper was torn ahead of time. And we couldn't watch TV or do anything. They didn't even own a TV." And they remember all that. And, it was an experience for them. Yeah.
She was, her eyes were wide open. She had such a good time. And it was same thing. She said
Yeah,
over
yeah,
again.
yeah.
It was a whole about movements, just really on college campuses, and just it's a really, really interesting kind of way of thinking. It's just fascinating development in the last, 50 years.
I have a 12-year-old attorney bat mitzvah, and I'm sending your book out to her. Now it has it because her mother's is, this is interesting. Her mother's Israeli. There's 3 sisters. Her mother's Israeli. Her middle sister, they're both like very secular. And the third sister is Chabad. And they're always fighting. There's always this fight, that they get at.
Yeah, two shuls on a desert island.
Yeah. So I think she'll find it very interesting. Thank you.
I'm glad.
Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you all for coming.
Yes, as I mentioned, Isaac has copies over here for sale. How much are the copies?
$18.99. The YA book.
Oops. I'm sure we can find it somewhere.